Rain had a way of owning the village of Kalimba. It didn't fall softly or kindly. It came down in sweeping sheets, filling the air with gray, soaking the earth until every step felt heavy. The mountains that surrounded the village stayed wrapped in thick mist, like silent giants watching over a place that carried far too many secrets. People said Kalimba was a land of old stories, some whispered, some forgotten on purpose. The older villagers often spoke in low voices, careful not to disturb whatever spirits they believed still wandered the hills. The younger ones didn't ask too many questions. Asking questions in Kalimba had never been safe. On the far edge of the village, near the path that led to the cliffs and the roaring sea, stood a small wooden house, weathered, faded, and always shining with the same soft orange glow. It was the home of Mara, the widow who barely spoke and rarely came into the village square. Her hair, once thick and dark, now fell in messy strands around her tired face. Some said she smiled once, long ago. No one had seen it in years. But it wasn't Mara herself who made people uneasy. It was the lantern. A single lantern hung outside her door. Simple in shape, covered in rust and rain marks, but its flame, its strange, stubborn flame, never went out. Not once in 7 long years. No matter how hard the storm hit, no matter how the wind screamed, no matter how heavy the world seemed to become, the lantern burned. To some, it was a miracle, to others a curse. But in truth, it was a reminder, one the villagers wished they could forget. Whenever someone passed Mara's home, they walked a little faster. Some made the sign of protection across their chest. Others pretended not to see the light at all. No one dared speak of the night the lantern was first lit. No one dared bring up the man Mara lost, the man who walked into a storm and never walked back out. Children whispered stories about ghosts trapped inside the flame. Grown men said the lantern held the soul of Aaron, Mara's missing husband. A few believed the flame would only die when the truth finally did. Even the bravest people in Kalimba avoided that part of the road after dark. Inside her home, Mara's days were heavy and quiet. She kept her windows closed and her curtains drawn. She moved like someone carrying invisible weight. The lantern was the only thing that still lived brightly around her, as if it carried the life she once had, warm, hopeful, full of dreams. But there was something deeper behind the glow, something no one could explain, something no one really wanted to understand. Because the truth was simple. The night Aaron disappeared, the lantern had lit itself. And ever since that moment, Kalimba had changed. People stopped laughing the same way, stopped trusting one another as they once did, stopped looking at Mara without fear or guilt. The rain beat on the village now, as it had every day before. And through the curtain of storm, the lantern at Mara's door burned like a lonely heartbeat, steady, bright, unbroken. A promise that refused to fade, a memory that no one dared face, a mystery waiting in the dark. The glow had remained for 7 years, and something in the air whispered that it would not remain much longer. Before the storms took everything from her, Mara's life had once been warm and full of quiet joy. The villagers often forgot that part. They only remembered the widow wrapped in shadows, not the young woman who used to stand by the shore with hope in her eyes. Back then, Mara was known for her laughter, soft, bright, and easy. She worked at the small market near the docks, selling woven baskets and decorated shells shaped by her own hands. People would come from neighboring villages just to see her work. But Mara never cared for the attention. Her heart belonged to one person only, Aaron, the fisherman with the gentle smile. Aaron was humble, strong, and kind in a way that made others trust him without trying. He wasn't wealthy or powerful, but he carried something even better, honesty. With Aaron, everything felt safe. Everything felt steady. They grew up in the same village, often crossing paths near the water or on the forest trails. No one was surprised when they fell in love. Their bond grew slowly, like roots taking hold beneath the soil. One day, while the sky glowed red at sunset, Aaron took Mara's hands and told her he wanted a future with her. She agreed before he could even finish the sentence. Their small wedding was simple but full of happiness. The lanterns around the village glowed softly, and the ocean breeze carried laughter through the night. Mara remembered that night often. It was the last time she saw the whole village smiling without fear. After the wedding, Mara and Aron settled in the little wooden house near the cliffs. They dreamed of having a son one day. Aron even carved a small wooden boat for the child he hoped would arrive soon. Mara kept it safe in a box beside her bed. She would touch it sometimes, feeling the smooth wood, imagining tiny fingers holding it one day. For a while, life was gentle. But gentle things don't always last in Kalimba. One evening, the sky darkened faster than usual. Heavy clouds gathered over the sea, thick and dark like giants leaning over the water. The wind picked up, pushing the waves into sharp peaks. The villagers warned the fishermen not to go out, but Aron wasn't supposed to fish that night. He had only planned to check a spot near the rocks for a net he had left behind. "I'll be back before the sky opens," he had told Mara, brushing his thumb against her cheek. But the sky opened sooner than anyone expected. Rain fell in giant, punishing drops. Thunder rolled across the mountains like a warning from the earth itself. Mara waited by the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the sea churn like a living thing. Minutes turned into hours. Hours stretched into a night that felt endless. Aron never returned. The villagers searched the next morning, though their fear slowed them. They found the broken pieces of his small boat, but no trace of his body. The sea had swallowed him, they said. Some whispered that he drowned. Others said the storm claimed him. And a few, only a few, said they heard something strange that night. Voices, shouts, a splash that didn't sound like a wave. But no one spoke of that openly. Not then. When the search ended and the villagers returned to their homes, Mara stood alone by her door. She felt a sharp emptiness inside her, like someone had taken her heart and left only silence. She didn't cry right away. Instead, she walked to the table, picked up the old lantern that Aron used when he returned late from the sea, and carried it outside. She lit it with shaking hands, whispering, "Come home." She meant to leave it burning through the night. Just one night, a symbol of hope. But by morning, the lantern was still burning. And by the next storm, it still did not go out. The villagers grew uneasy. Rain poured directly over the flame, yet it did not dim. Wind pushed against it with all its strength, yet the light never flickered. Some people claimed the lantern glowed brighter when Mara cried. Others swore they saw the flame shift, almost as if it reacted to the sea. Rumors grew like wild vines. Some said Aron's soul was trapped in the lantern. Some said Mara had made a promise too deep and too painful, and the lantern carried it for her. Some said the flame meant Aron hadn't died at all, but was trying to return. No one dared ask Mara what she believed. The widow who once laughed now spoke only to the lantern. And every night, the glowing flame reminded the village of a truth they weren't ready to face. Something about Aron's disappearance had never been explained, and the lantern was determined not to let them forget. Kalimba was a village that carried its secrets like stones tied to its ankles. Heavy, quiet, and impossible to shake off. Ever since Aron disappeared, the air around the village had changed. People no longer trusted the sea the same way. They no longer trusted each other the same way. And above all, they no longer trusted the silence that had grown between them. The villagers pretended to live normal lives. They woke at dawn, gathered water from the well, sold fish and fruit in the square, and went home before nightfall. But underneath their routines, something restless moved inside them. Fear, guilt, jealousy, an old superstition that refused to die. Every time someone walked past Mara's house, they felt that weight. The lantern at her door burned like a watchful eye, exposing truths they tried to bury. Even if no one spoke it aloud, everyone knew the village hadn't told the whole story of Aron's last night. Some were frightened by what they might uncover. Some already knew too much, and a few wished the lantern would simply burn out so they could forget. At the center of these tangled emotions stood Elder Sephew, the oldest and most respected man in the village. His back had curved with age, and his eyes were always half hidden behind deep, tired lines. People still sought his guidance, but he no longer carried the same steady confidence he once had. Something dark sat in his memories, something he wished he had faced years ago. Every evening, Sephew walked through the village square with slow, uneven steps. Villagers pretended not to notice how his gaze drifted toward Mara's lantern. They also pretended not to notice how he quickly looked away, as if the flame reminded him of something he feared to admit. He carried a regret no one dared question. Then there was Tori, a fisherman with calloused hands and a stiff jaw. He was younger than Mara by a few years, but looked older these days. He avoided her eyes whenever she passed him in the market. Even from a distance, he seemed uncomfortable, like being near her brought back memories he wanted to run from. Whenever someone mentioned Aaron's name, Tori's shoulders tightened, and he left the conversation without a word. People whispered that he had been out on the water the night Aaron vanished. Some said he heard things he didn't report. Others said he saw things he shouldn't have. But Tori never spoke up, and no one pressed him. Silence was safer. Yet not everyone in the village followed that rule. Anya, a young girl no older than 12, refused to see Mara as the village ghost. She had grown up hearing the stories, how the lantern held a spirit, how Mara was cursed, how the sea watched her like a hungry beast. But Anya saw none of that. She saw a lonely woman who brought out dried fruit every time she visited and asked gentle questions about her school. Despite her parents' warnings, Anya often slipped away to Mara's porch. She would sit under the glowing lantern, swinging her small legs, pretending she wasn't scared. Mara never pushed her away. In fact, Anya was the only soul in Kalimba who still managed to bring a faint warmth to Mara's eyes. But even Anya sensed there was something wrong in the village, something adults refused to talk about. Sometimes she asked questions. Why don't people visit Mara? Why is everyone scared of her lantern? Why did Aaron disappear? Every time, her parents' answers were the same. Don't ask. Don't talk about it. Don't go near anything that belongs to that night. The weight of their silence grew heavier the more they avoided the truth. The lantern's flame became a symbol no one could escape. It reminded Tori of the storm. It reminded Elder Sephew of choices that still haunted him. It reminded the villagers of the night their courage broke. And deep down, every one of them feared the same thing. The lantern was waiting, watching, holding their secrets in its steady glow. And someday, it might reveal everything they tried so hard to hide. The rain had been falling all afternoon, but by evening it turned fierce, sharp, slanting, and relentless. Most villagers hurried indoors, shutting their windows tight before the storm grew worse. The sky cracked with thunder, and the wind rolled across Kalimba like an angry spirit. Through this storm came a lone traveler. His cloak was soaked, and his boots were coated with mud from the forest path. His name was Kale, though the villagers would not learn that right away. He walked with a steady pace, as if storms did not scare him, and as if he'd seen far worse places than Kalimba. When he stepped into the village square, heads turned. Strangers were rare in Kalimba, especially during weather like this. A few people whispered from beneath their umbrellas, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Outsiders brought questions, and Kalimba was a place that ran from questions. Kale ignored their stares. He looked around calmly, taking in the quiet houses, the mist-covered mountains, and the empty streets. But something else caught his attention, something brighter than lightning, something steady in the rain. A glow. Near the far end of the village, on the road leading to the cliffs, Kale saw a warm light shining through the storm. Mara's lantern. The flame didn't move, didn't bend, didn't waver, even when the wind hit the village hard enough to shake rooftops. Kale paused, wiping water from his brow, and stared at the lantern with a mix of confusion and curiosity. What kind of flame survives this weather, he murmured. No flame should have been alive in that storm. Not even for a moment, much less for minutes or hours. But that one did. Drawn to it, Kale made his way toward Mara's home. The villagers tried to stop him, some calling out warnings. Don't go near her place. Nothing good comes from that house. She's cursed. Leave her be. Kale slowed, surprised by their reactions. The fear in their voices wasn't the usual fear of superstition. It was deeper heavier, as if they were defending themselves from something they didn't understand. He looked at them closely, but no one explained further. They just shook their heads and backed away. He turned toward the lantern again. The closer he got, the more the flame seemed to pull him forward. The rain soaked his clothes, but the air near the lantern felt strangely warm. The flame inside glowed a soft orange, steady and gentle, as if protected by a force beyond nature's reach. Mara stepped out onto her porch just as Cale approached. Her shawl clung to her shoulders, and her eyes carried the same tired sadness that had followed her for years. She didn't seem shocked to see a stranger. If anything, she looked curious, maybe even wary. Cale bowed his head politely. "I'm looking for shelter. I didn't mean to intrude." Mara studied him for a moment before stepping aside. "You may wait here until the rain softens," she said quietly. Cale nodded and stood beneath the porch roof, wiping water from his face. The lantern hung only a few feet away, glowing calmly. He watched it closely. Something strange happened. The flame flickered sideways, almost like it was turning toward the sea. Not up, not down, but outward, pointing past the village toward the cliffs. Cale's eyes narrowed. Flames didn't behave like that. Mara noticed him staring. "Most people don't look at it for long," she said softly. "Why?" Cale asked. "They're afraid of what it means." Before he could ask more, another burst of thunder shook the sky. Behind them, several villagers watched from a distance, whispering nervously. Cale could feel their fear, but he didn't understand it yet. What were they hiding? Why did they look at the lantern as if it might speak? As the storm raged on, Cale realized one thing for certain. Kalimba was a village buried in secrets, and this lantern, this strange, impossible light, was the key to uncovering them. The storm softened by morning, but the air stayed heavy, as if the sky still held unshed tears. Cale hadn't planned on staying in Kalimba for more than a night, yet something about the lantern, about Mara, made him linger. He found himself returning to her porch the next day under the excuse of asking directions. But the truth was simpler. He felt pulled here, the same way the flame seemed to pull toward the sea. Mara wasn't used to visitors, especially not ones who stayed longer than a few minutes. Yet she didn't send Cale away. Something in his quiet nature made her feel safe, something she hadn't felt in years. She didn't trust him, not fully, but she trusted the calm he brought with him. Cale sat on the porch railing, looking at the lantern again. Its flame burned softly, almost peaceful today, but he remembered how it had twisted during the storm, almost pointing to the cliffs like a warning. "Does it always burn like this?" he asked gently. Mara didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the sea, distant and troubled. "It burns as it wishes," she finally whispered. "I don't control it. I only lit it once. And since then, it has never gone out." She said this without emotion, but Cale sensed the weight behind her words. A flame lasting 7 years was unnatural, even magical. But the pain behind that miracle was far more human. Cale hesitated, then spoke softly. "Mara, what happened the night Aaron disappeared?" The name hit her like a sudden wind. She stiffened, gripping the wooden arm of her chair. No one had dared say her husband's name in years. Hearing it again was like reopening a wound that never healed. "You shouldn't ask questions like that," she whispered. "I know," Cale replied, his voice calm. "But you're carrying something alone. Maybe you don't have to." Mara closed her eyes. Memories she had locked away began pressing against her walls. After a long silence, she began to speak. Not to Cale, but to the air, to the sea, to the past that refused to rest. She told him about Aaron's laugh, the warmth of his hands, and how he used to hum old songs as he fixed his nets. She spoke of their dreams, the small family they planned, the life they wanted to build. Cale listened without interrupting, his expression soft and patient. Then her voice trembled. "That night, I felt something wrong in the air. The storm came too fast, too strong." She swallowed hard. Aaron said he would return before the clouds broke. But the storm caught him first. Cale leaned forward. And after that, Mara wrapped her arms around herself as if the memory chilled her. "I waited by the window for hours. I prayed for him to walk through the door, soaked but smiling. But he never came. Her breath shook, and her eyes glistened with old pain. When dawn arrived, they found his boat broken near the rocks. They said the sea took him. But the sea, she paused. The sea doesn't take a man like that without giving something back. Cale frowned. What do you mean? Mara lifted her gaze toward the lantern. I heard him, she said softly. That night, in the storm, his voice calling my name. Cale's skin tingled. The way she said it, calm but certain, sent a shiver through him. You think he was still alive? He asked gently. I don't know, Mara whispered. But I heard him again weeks later, and again months after. Only when it rains. Only when the wind hits the cliffs a certain way. She pressed a hand to her heart. It's faint, but it's him. Before Cale could respond, the lantern flickered. Not from the breeze. There was none. Not from Mara's movement. She hadn't touched it. It pulsed. A soft glow that brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again. Cale stared at it. Does it do that often? Mara shook her head. Only when someone speaks the truth aloud. Or when I'm close to remembering something I've tried to forget. Her words made Cale stiffen. He turned his attention back to the village. Mara, the villagers. They seem afraid. Not just of the lantern, of what it represents. They don't want the past uncovered, she said quietly. But why? Cale asked. Why would they fear the truth about your husband? Mara looked away, her voice barely audible. Because the sea didn't take him alone. Cale's heart pounded. Something in her tone sent a ripple of dread through the air. He thought back to the villagers' faces, Tori's guilt-stricken eyes, Elder Sephew's trembling hands, the way conversations died whenever the lantern was mentioned. There were too many holes, too many half-truths. Aaron's story didn't add up. Cale stood slowly. Mara, I think Aaron's death wasn't an accident. Mara's breath caught. She didn't ask him to stop. She didn't deny it. She simply looked at the lantern, the stubborn, everlasting flame that had become her only companion. The flame glowed brighter, casting a warm light across her face. As if it agreed, as if it had been waiting for someone to say those words aloud. Cale stepped off the porch, determination tightening his jaw. I'm going to find the truth, he said. Mara didn't call him back. She only whispered, be careful. This village fears the truth more than they fear the storms. Cale nodded. He understood now. The lantern wasn't just a symbol of grief. It was a warning, a guide, and perhaps a witness. And whatever it had seen 7 years ago was ready to rise again. Cale headed toward the shoreline, following the narrow path that wound between the cliffs and the sea. The morning sunlight broke weakly through the clouds, turning the ocean a dull silver. But even in daylight, the waves carried a strange heaviness, like they were guarding something. He paused near the spot where, according to the villagers, Aaron's broken boat had been found years ago. The rocks were dark and sharp, shaped like jagged teeth rising from the water. It wasn't hard to imagine how a storm could pull a small boat into their deadly path. But something still felt wrong. Cale crouched, running his fingers over a rock face. There were faint scratches across the surface, almost like marks from something being dragged or pushed, or from a boat that hadn't crashed by accident. A chill shot through him. As he stood, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint echo. It wasn't quite a voice, but not quite the sound of waves either. It sounded intentional, almost like a whisper trying to break through the noise of the sea. Cale's heart tightened. Mara had spoken of hearing Aaron's voice during storms. But this wasn't a storm, and he wasn't imagining it. He stepped closer to the water. The whisper grew clearer, still soft, still broken, but unmistakably human. A name floated through the air, fragile and distant. Mare. Cale froze. The air thickened around him, and for a moment, the whole shoreline felt suspended in time. He felt no fear, only a deep sadness, as if the sea itself was grieving. He backed away slowly, his mind racing. If Mara had been hearing this for years, no wonder she refused to move on. If the voice was real, it meant Aaron's story was far from over. Cale turned and hurried back toward the village, his thoughts tangled. He needed answers, and there was only one person who seemed willing, if terrified, to give them. Tori. He found her at the small market square, quietly sorting through bundles of dried herbs. Her hands trembled when she saw him approaching. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered sharply. "Not today." "Tori," Kale said, lowering his voice, "I heard something at the cliffs." Her face drained of color. She stepped backward, shaking her head. "Stop. Don't say it. You don't know what you're talking about. I think Aaron didn't die the way the village claims." Tori flinched. She looked around quickly, making sure no one was listening. Then she grabbed Kale's arm and pulled him into the shade behind her small stall. "Why are you doing this?" she hissed, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. "Why come here and stir up things that should stay buried?" Kale met her gaze. "Because Mara deserves the truth. And because the truth is already rising, whether the village wants it to or not." Tori squeezed her eyes shut. Her breathing turned unsteady. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she murmured, "There were people on the cliffs that night." Kale stared at her. "Ooh." She shook her head frantically. "No, I can't. If I say anything, Elder Sephu will." "Tori," Kale interrupted, softer now. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to understand why a whole village is terrified of one widow's lantern." Tori swallowed hard. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes. "Because the lantern should have gone out," she whispered. "It wasn't meant to burn this long. Not after what happened." Her voice cracked, and she covered her mouth as if she had already said too much. Before Kale could press further, a shadow stretched across them. They both turned. Elder Sephu stood a few steps away, his expression cold and unreadable. "Young man," he said, his voice low, "you are asking questions that do not belong to you." Kale straightened. "I'm only trying to." "You are trying," Sephu interrupted, "to reopen wounds that our village has closed for its own survival." Kale held his ground. Maybe those wounds never healed. Sephu's eyes darkened. "Some truths," he said softly, "destroy more than they heal. Leave the past where it lies, traveler, or you may not survive the storm it brings." The warning was clear. Tori looked at Kale with pleading eyes, silently begging him to stop. But Kale knew it was too late. The whisper from the sea, the marks on the rocks, the villagers' fear. The past was stirring, and he wasn't walking away. The air around the market square felt heavier after Elder Sephu's words, thick with tension, like the stillness before lightning splits the sky. Kale watched the old man walk away, his cane tapping sharply against the stone path. Every tap sounded like a reminder. Leave. Stop. Forget. Kale exhaled slowly. He could still feel the intensity in Sephu's gaze, the kind that held secrets buried deeper than the sea itself. Tori clutched her herbs against her chest. "You should listen to him," she whispered shakily. "People who dig too deep into what happened, they don't stay long." Kale looked down at her, surprised. Someone else tried to uncover the truth? Tori's lips parted, but fear sealed them shut again. She wiped her eyes and looked away. "Please, Kale, just leave it alone." He shook his head gently. "I can't. Mara deserves answers. And Aaron, wherever he is, he deserves peace." Tori took a trembling step back. "Then may the sea protect you," she whispered, as if he'd already stepped into danger. Kale walked away from the square with a restless storm inside him. The elder's warning wasn't just a threat. It was a confession wrapped in fear. Something had happened that night 7 years ago. Something dark. And the lantern refused to let the village forget it. He made his way back toward Mara's small wooden home. The path felt different now, quieter, sharper, like the wind itself was holding its breath. When he reached the porch, he saw Mara sitting in her usual chair, staring toward the ocean. The lantern glowed beside her, steady as always. But when she turned to Kale, he noticed something new in her eyes, a spark of determination, fragile but real. "You spoke to them," she said softly. Kale nodded. "Tori told me there were people on the cliffs the night Aaron disappeared." Mara's fingers tightened around the armrest. "I always suspected. The elder warned me," Kale continued, "that the truth will bring danger." Mara let out a slow, tired breath. "The truth brought danger long before you arrived. You didn't create this storm, Kale." She looked at the lantern. "It's been raging for years. Kale stepped closer. Then let me help you face it. The lantern flickered, one long, slow pulse. Mara's eyes widened. It heard you, she whispered. Kale didn't know what that meant, but he sat beside her anyway. Mara, did Aaron have enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt him? She shook her head. Everyone loved Aaron. He was gentle, kind. He helped people. He listened. No one would ever hurt him. She paused, voice trembling. Unless something forced them. Kale frowned. Forced them. Mara's gaze drifted toward the cliffs. Aaron was the only fisherman in Kalimba who refused to be part of the old customs. He said they were dangerous. He said they brought nothing but suffering. She swallowed hard. But the elders, they believed those customs kept the village safe. What kind of customs? Kale asked. Mara hesitated. The lantern's flame leaned toward her, as if urging her to speak. Offerings to the sea, she said finally. Gifts, sacrifices, things I never fully understood. Aaron said they were wrong. He argued with the elders often. Her voice cracked. The last argument he had with them was the night before he disappeared. Kale felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. Mara, do you think Aaron was targeted because he stood against them? Mara's lips trembled, but she nodded. Kale leaned back, stunned. And the villagers kept silent all these years. They're afraid, Mara whispered. Fear can make good people do terrible things. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, even though the clouds overhead were thin and pale. Kale looked up. Another storm? Mara shook her head slowly. Not yet, but storms don't always begin in the sky. Kale understood. The storm brewing now was in the village, in the secrets, in the silence, in the guilt carried by every person who avoided Mara's eyes. The lantern glowed brighter suddenly, as if responding to a presence Kale couldn't see. Mara's breath hitched. It's warning us, she murmured. Something is coming. Kale's jaw tightened. The elder's threat echoed in his mind. Leave the past where it lies, traveler, or you may not survive the storm it brings. But Kale had already made his choice. I'm not leaving, he said firmly. Mara turned to him, her expression a mix of hope and fear. Then we must be ready. Another flash of light stirred inside the lantern, quick, sharp, like a spark caught in panic. Kale stood, looking toward the village as wind swept across the cliffs in a sudden rush. Whatever the elders had hidden, whatever the sea whispered, whatever the lantern refused to let die, it was waking, and it was coming for them. The storm crashed over Kalimba with a force the village hadn't seen in years. Wind howled between the wooden houses, and the sea roared like something alive and furious. People rushed inside, bolting doors, whispering prayers. But Mara did not hide. She walked straight into the storm, lantern in hand, Kale close beside her. The lantern's flame burned brighter than ever, so bright it lit the path ahead like a trail of gold. Every time the wind tried to bend it, the flame pushed back, steady and strong. It was guiding her, calling her, pulling her to the place where Aaron's life had been stolen. The cliffs. When they reached the edge, a group of villagers stood waiting. Their faces were pale, wet with rain and guilt. Elder Sephew was in front, shoulders bent, as if carrying a weight too heavy for one man. Mara, he called over the wind, voice shaking. We never meant for this to happen. Mara stopped a few steps away, her hair whipping across her face, her clothes soaked but her eyes unblinking. Then why did you let it? She asked, her voice low, broken, but sharp as glass. Sephew lowered his head. We feared the sea's anger. We feared losing everything. And Aaron, he saw what he shouldn't have. The other men behind him trembled. Some cried. Some stared at the ground, unable to face her. Kale stood at Mara's side, ready to protect her if anything happened. But Mara didn't move toward the man. She simply stood still, holding the lantern like it was the last piece of her heart. You took him from me, she said. You left me alone for 7 years. And you let me believe he drowned by chance. Torai stepped forward, tears mixing with the storm. We were cowards, Mara. We let fear run our lives. We didn't just wrong Aaron, we wronged you. The wind blew harder, but Mara didn't waver. The lantern flared, its light turning almost white. The men shielded their eyes. Elder Sephew fell to his knees. "We'll take whatever punishment you decide," he said. "We deserve it." Mara stared at the lantern as it pulsed in her hands. For a moment, she imagined Arin standing there in the rain. She could almost hear his voice, soft, warm, full of the love she still carried. Arin would never want blood. Arin would never want more pain. Arin would want peace. Her breath shook as the truth settled in her heart. Rage had burned inside her for years, but now she saw clearly. Taking revenge would only create new wounds. It wouldn't bring Arin back. It wouldn't heal her loneliness. It wouldn't silence the storm inside her. Mara lifted the lantern higher. "I could hate you," she said. "I could curse you. I could demand you suffer the way I have." The villagers braced, expecting fire, fury, punishment. "But Arin loved this village," she continued. "He believed people could change. He believed fear could be beaten. And she swallowed hard. "I won't become the darkness that took him from me." A silence fell, even with the storm raging around them. "I choose forgiveness." Sephi looked up, stunned. "Mara, you would forgive us?" "No," she said softly. "Not for you. For me. For Arin." She lowered the lantern until it rested close to her chest. "This ends tonight." The lantern flickered, once, twice, and then its bright glow softened. For the first time in 7 years, the flame seemed tired, like a spirit finally free to rest. A warm wave of quiet swept through the cliffs, as if even the sea exhaled. Kale placed a gentle hand on Mara's arm. "You did what many people never could." She didn't answer. She simply watched the lantern dim, knowing her choice had broken a cycle of fear and hate that had ruled Kalimba for generations. Behind her, the villagers bowed their heads, not out of fear, but out of respect. The storm began to slow, and the lantern waited for morning. Dawn arrived slowly, as if the sky itself wanted to be gentle with the village after such a long, painful night. The storm clouds drifted apart, leaving behind a soft gray light. The sea, which had roared with anger only hours before, now rested like a tired giant, calm and quiet. Mara stood on the cliffs where everything had changed. Her hair was still wet, her clothes still heavy from the rain, but her heart felt lighter than it had in 7 long years. Kale stood nearby, watching her with quiet respect. The villagers gathered at a distance, unsure if they were welcome, but wanted to witness the final moment of a story that had haunted them all. The lantern in Mara's hands glowed faintly, its smallest flame since the night Arin vanished. It flickered softly, like a candle fighting sleep. Mara held it close to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to the lantern, the sea, or Arin himself. Maybe all three. The wind brushed her cheek, gentle this time. Not angry, not demanding, but almost comforting. She closed her eyes and let herself feel it. For once, the pain didn't crush her. It simply sat beside her, quiet and bearable. Kale stepped closer. "You did something incredible last night," he said. "You ended years of fear." Mara nodded. "I ended my own fear, too." She looked at the lantern again. The small flame trembled. Then, as the first golden beam of sunlight touched the glass, the flame slowly faded. One soft glow, one tiny spark, then nothing. The lantern went out. No sudden flash, no dramatic sound, just a gentle, peaceful end, like a soul finally finding rest. A single tear rolled down Mara's cheek, but it wasn't from grief. It was release, a quiet freedom. Behind her, Elder Sephew bowed his head. The other villagers followed. They understood what the moment meant. Arin's spirit was no longer trapped by their sins. The truth had been faced. The wound had been opened, cleaned, and finally allowed to heal. Mara lifted the lantern, now dark and cool. "Goodbye, Arin," she whispered. "Rest now." Kale offered her a warm smile. "What will you do next?" "I'll live," she said simply. "For the first time in years. I'll live." Kale nodded, knowing his time in Kalimba was ending. "Thank you for letting me walk with you through this." "Thank you for not turning away," Mara replied. As he walked toward the village path, Mara faced the sea one last time. The waves were calm, sparkling under the new sunlight. She breathed deeply, feeling the salt and the warmth on her skin. Then she stepped forward, leaving behind the shadows that had once consumed her. No lantern, no fear, only a new beginning. And with each quiet step, the village of Kalimba began to heal too.